A very scary prison in Thailand was located in a place where no one could escape even if they wanted to, because it was thousands of kilometers away from the population and in the middle of a dangerous forest. Therefore, even after being brutally tortured, the prisoners never gathered the courage to escape because they knew that if they even tried to escape, they would die on the way. So the story begins in a city in England where we see a train moving. This train was carrying approximately 80,000 prisoners to a prison. All these prisoners were suffering from hunger and thirst because they had not been given army food or water for a long time. Therefore, many prisoners were dying of hunger and thirst on the way. After traveling a few thousand kilometers, all the prisoners were taken on a road winding through a jungle. After a few hours, they finally reached the prison, the very place they had endured such a long and painful journey. But upon arriving, the prisoners discovered that this was no ordinary prison. It was an abandoned railway line where they're made to lay and repair the railway line all day long. In fact, the officers there were building a long railway line from Thailand to Burma, and they were using these prisoners for this. The entire railway line was about 400 kilometers long. However, this work was not easy at all, as the prisoners were woken up early in the morning and put straight to work. Even after working all day, they weren't given any food. Furthermore, if someone tired from work and sat down for a while, the officers would brutally torture them. Many prisoners died while working this hard day, even if they wanted to escape. Escape was impossible because the prison was so remote that there was no way to escape. Upon reaching this place, the prisoners became extremely frightened. Now we see an incident many years later. The time is 1980. Here we see a veterans club where numerous medals and trophies were displayed. A veterans club is actually a club created for former Army soldiers. These are people who once fought for the country, but now they are veterans. This means that all the members of this club have fought at some point. Here we see a man named Ethan. He was also a former soldier and is now a member of this club. However, Ethan was a little different from the other soldiers because he would come to this club almost every day and publish the timetable of a particular train in a newspaper. Although everyone was surprised to see Ethan's daily routine, no one could understand why Ethan did this. Many thought that perhaps Ethan had some mental problem. But this did not affect Ethan. Ethan would check the timetable of that year he would come back to the same station. He would travel from one station to another on that train. It wasn't his job, though. Yet he did it every day, seemingly without reason. Ethan had been a very good soldier in World War II. But even after so many years had passed, Ethan still held on to all those memories. Ethan had dedicated his entire life to war and his country. He hadn't even married, and his family, as it were, didn't exist in the world. So he did this every day, mainly to keep himself busy. But today, Ethan had accidentally boarded the wrong train. He ended up sitting next to a girl named Patri, who was very beautiful in appearance. They were having a very normal conversation. As they talked, Petri realized that Ethan missed the train he wanted to board because he had the old train schedule. Hearing this, Emma gave him a new schedule with the correct timetable for the current train. Ethan was overjoyed. He then learned from Emma that she was a nurse from Canada and was about 17 years younger than him. They talked about their respective cities, and Ethan began to like her quite a bit. At one point in the story, Ethan learned that Emma would be returning to his city from Scotland the following week. He was overjoyed to learn this. Then the day arrives for Emma to leave for Scotland, and Ethan has been waiting for the train since morning, excited to meet Emma. When the train to Scotland arrives, Ethan quickly reaches the front of the train, imagining he too had just gotten off a train. At that moment, he meets Emma. Ethan tells him that there must be something in common between them, otherwise, why would they meet again? Emma smiles. Ethan then wants to be Emma's friend and invites him to his house today. Emma agrees and goes to his house. There, Ethan cooks food for Emma with his own hands and they both talk a lot. In fact, they have one thing in common. Both of them were single and had no known family. So, within a short time, they became very good friends and started spending a lot of time together. Gradually, they fell in love. 3 years passed before they knew each other. It was 1983. After 3 years of dating, Emma and Ethan got married. One morning, after their honeymoon, while Ethan was sleeping, he suddenly felt a Japanese soldier approach him and arrest him and take him away. The soldier slowly led him to a very scary place. Seeing that place, Ethan was terrified. It was going on. Ethan and his comrade's job was to deliver supplies to the radio facility. One day, while Ethan was busy working with his comrades, their team leader arrived at their base. The leader sadly announced to everyone that their country had lost to Japan. All the soldiers had already surrendered. Now they too would have to surrender. Hearing this, all the soldiers felt deeply saddened. They were unable to accept their defeat. Their team leader then asked them to leave everything and come out. But leaving this radio base was very difficult for Ethan, because he had worked so hard to become a soldier. He wanted to bring victory to his country, but he had not succeeded in doing so. After this, we see the soldiers leaving the radio base one by one and surrendering to Japan. The Japanese soldiers remove the British flag in front of them and plant the Japanese flag instead, which was very painful for everyone. He gets stuck in the water. He doesn't want to go inside at all. But some other soldiers follow him and drag him into a dark room. Here, Ethan screams for his life. But later, it is revealed that Ethan was seeing all this in his dream. In reality, he was actually lying on the ground, screaming. Hearing Ethan scream, Emma reaches there and for the first time sees Ethan so scared. From that day on, Ethan became very quiet. He would stand alone near the seashore most of the time. Meanwhile, Emma could not understand what had suddenly happened to Ethan. Why was he isolating himself like this? Now we see some scenes from the past. The time was during World War II. Ethan and some other soldiers were working at a base in Singapore and fighting for their country, England. At that time, there was a war between England and Japan. Japanese soldiers capture and hold approximately 80,000 British soldiers that day. First, they gather all the British prisoners and take them to a railway station. Then, they force them onto a train, which takes them directly to a location in Thailand, where a special prisoner camp is set up for them. Told about the jail, she comes in. There were many of Ethan's things there. There was a very telling story of Ethan's was built. Now we see Ethan again in the present. Ethan was often haunted by painful memories of the war, making him very depressed most of the time. He had distanced himself from Emma, and Emma didn't like this change in Ethan at all. She couldn't understand what had happened to Ethan. Then one day, when Ethan went out, Emma went to Ethan's study. She tells him that if she doesn't know everything now, she might not be able to understand her husband. In that way, her husband might forget her. Therefore, to cure Ethan, she must know everything. Hearing this, Mike agrees to tell him everything. The incident then flashes back to the past. After the surrender that day, they were taken directly to Thailand on the same train they had been put on. By the time they arrived, it was night. Every soldier inside the train was in a state of fear and terror. They were extremely hungry and thirsty because they hadn't been given a drop of water, let alone food, all day. Therefore, every soldier was very weak, but this didn't matter to the Japanese soldiers. They were taking 80 soldiers through the foothills of the jungle, where a Japanese breeding camp was located. So, after traveling a considerable distance through the jungle, Ethan and his companions stopped at a place and he was released while keeping it. In fact, Ethan was losing his mental health day by day, and this made Petri very worried. One day, Ethan comes back without saying anything. Petri repeatedly asks what happened to her. Why is he doing this? But Ethan doesn't say a word to her. That day, Petri, seeing neither way, goes straight to a man named Mike, and this Mike was a friend of Eric. During World War II, Soldier Petrie tearfully says that Ethan gradually lost his mind. This leads Emma to realize that Ethan was taken to a Japanese prison during World War II. He was subjected to numerous forms of torture, not just him, but all his fellow prisoners as well. They were tortured so severely that they have yet to fully recover from the trauma. Seeing all this, Emma realizes that Ethan is likely still traumatized by these events. The next day, a tax officer arrives at Emma's house. He had come to deliver a bill. But when Ethan sees him, his holocaust suddenly begins. He mistakes the tax officer for a Japanese soldier and is about to attack him with a knife. Despite Emma's best efforts, he is unable to stop him. Ethan was arrested that day, but later, due to his mental condition, she's losing her composure. She's tried repeatedly to talk to him openly, but Ethan isn't sharing anything with her. That's why she's come to Mike today to find out what's happened in her husband's life that's causing him to change like this. But Mike tells her that since Ethan isn't telling you anything, it means it wouldn't be right for me to tell him either. Ethan probably doesn't want to tell you everything and show you how he is. So how can I do that? But Emma then tearfully begs her to stop. There was a war going on between England and the German army. Even if they somehow reached England, and England was in the hands of the German army, there they see several other British soldiers who had been captured earlier. They were all working to repair the railway line, even after midnight. Now they were being forced to work as laborers. Upon arriving, all the soldiers realized that at this place, soldiers are made to work all day long, 24 hours a day, from morning until night, and they are not even given proper food and water. Every soldier here is so weak that they are unable to work properly, and many die of exhaustion right before their eyes. Ethan is deeply saddened by such a dangerous scene. The next morning, when they arrive at the prisoner camp, the Japanese soldiers select Ethan and some other soldiers. Then they were lined up and told that they had been selected to work on the railway line there. Among them were Ethan and Mike, engineers who had a good knowledge of machines and engines. Therefore, they were assigned to work within the camp, where their job was to repair broken engines. That night, when all the prisoners were sitting together in the camp and talking, one of them said, "I don't think these people will let us go so easily. If we continue to do as they say, we will die anyway. So, we have to escape from here as quickly as possible." Hearing all this, Ethan tells them that when they were being brought to Thailand by train, he'd drawn a map of the entire route so that he could remember it later. But while making the map, he realized that their breeding camp was so far from England. So, even if they managed to escape, England would still be a long way off and they would be caught again before they got there. Other than that time, if they losi, they will be captured again. All their hard work will be wasted. Therefore, until England is captured by their countrymen, even returning to their country is futile. Now, Ethan tells everyone here that he has calculated thoroughly and understood that this prison is located in a very remote and desolate place in Thailand, and the railway line being built here is 415 kilometers long, running directly from Thailand to Burma. The British once tried to build this railway line. They even started work, but stopped midway because they realized that it was too risky. Many people could have lost their lives. The main reason for this was that the entire railway line had to be built on difficult mountain paths, and anyone working there could die. This was certain. That's why the British had stopped the work. Now, the Japanese, seeing an opportunity, were trying to build the same line, where many prisoners were doing hard labor. Upon arriving, Ethan noticed a man named Jack. Jack looked very tired and hungry. Ethan went to him and tried to talk to him, but Jack was so exhausted that he had no strength to speak. Still, fearing torture, he continued working. Ethan had no way to help Jack, so he simply consoled him and returned. At night, when everyone was asleep, Ethan drew a map on his map, tracing the routes he had seen along the railway line that day. Meanwhile, he placed this map inside a bamboo pipe so that it would never fall into the hands of Japanese soldiers. While the soldiers were busy with their work, Ethan, Mike, and his companions would sneak around and try to catch the radio signal, and they were doing the same today. They were using a car's spare to hide there. Initially, the radio signal wasn't coming through at all, but after several attempts, Ethan and Mike finally succeeded in catching the signal. This made them both very happy. Then an English channel came on and it said they wanted to get the work done without caring about the lives of the prisoners. No one cared about the lives of those who died. After discussing all this, Philly said that no hasty decisions could be made. They had to calmly formulate a complete escape plan. Philly then asked Ethan to build a radio from scrap materials lying around, as the radio was their only means of receiving news from their country and, depending on the situation, deciding when and what to do to escape. Everyone agreed with Philly, and Ethan also agreed to build the radio, as he had special knowledge in that field. The next morning, Ethan set to work building the radio. Ethan slowly collected the materials needed to build the radio from various Japanese soldier vehicles, equipment, and abandoned objects lying around. His comrades also helped him gather the various items. In a very short time, Ethan assembled all the devices, and after everyone's hard work, they were able to build a radio. Radios were made anyway, but now they had to pick up a signal, which was a very difficult task. After this, Ethan and his comrades were sent to work on the railway line. That America's England has also now joined the war and is standing on England's side. This could potentially lead to England's return to its control. Ethan and Mike are overjoyed to hear this news. A glimmer of hope awakens in their hearts, as all they have to do now is wait and survive in this terrible prison, and by doing so, they will surely one day be freed. Let's start. That officer tortured Ethan so much that all the prisoners had tears in their eyes after hearing his screams. But there was nothing else for them to do except watch. Then he beats Officer Sir Ethan and makes him bleed completely. Ethan becomes unconscious right there. That night it was seen that his friends were trying to treat him. Ethan's arm was completely broken, so Mike ties his hands with the help of a piece of Abus. But Mike was feeling very guilty because it was he who had given the ID to make the radio. Yet today, Ethan had to suffer the punishment alone. But the soldier begins to pay attention to Ethan. He becomes a little suspicious of him, so he informs the soldier's main officer. A team then arrives and begins searching the entire camp, looking for any hidden items. Ethan and Manigesto avoid everyone's attention and reaches the pipe where he had hidden his map. But then the soldiers discover the radio Ethan had made. They gather all the prisoners and shout, demanding that the person who made the radio come forward immediately, as they already know who did it. Hearing this, Ethan and his companions become frightened. But the four of them still move forward together, along with Ethan, Mike, and two of his friends, who knew almost everything about engineering. The officer then tells them they must tell him about the team's leader. However, none of them spoke out of fear. At this point, the officer begins to beat one of them. Ethan feels bad about this. So Ethan then says that the whole plan was his. He built the radio himself. The others are not at fault. After this, the soldiers leave the other three and go to Ethan. Ethan then runs to his friends. He gives them the news one by one. After this, Ethan is again met by a man named Victor. Ethan then encourages Mayer by saying that even though his country has lost, hope is not over yet. He heard the news that America was on the side of England, and that his country would probably be free again, and that he too would be saved. That's why Ethan Mayer says that we're in the same situation. After hearing the news from Ethan, Mayer tells his colleagues, which creates a different kind of trust between them. After that day, it was seen that every day at midnight, Ethan and Feely came to the car and they turned on the signal on their radio and told the news and whatever they found on the radio. But neither one day nor suddenly was it seen that a Japanese a massive hit on here. They are working like spies from England. Ethan is then taken out of the camp. Frank ties both of Ethan's hands tightly to his car. Then they start driving at high speed. This forces Ethan to run, and because both of his hands were completely broken yesterday, he felt as if his hands would be torn off immediately, and he was experiencing death-like pain. After traveling a long distance like this, Ethan is brought to the headquarters. Here, it is revealed that this is the same dark room that Ethan repeatedly sees in his dreams. Ethan is then taken inside that room. Frank and the main officer were present there. Then the officer asks Ethan, "Just yesterday we discovered a map, and we learned you made it. This proves you wanted to send information about our location. Now tell us clearly, what was your real plan, and who were you in contact with? You wanted to draw this map and send it to some people." In fact, the Japanese soldiers were thinking Ethan might have made this map and tried to send information somewhere. That's why they repeatedly questioned Ethan about it. But Ethan then tells them, "Okay, you guys should just ask yourselves what you're saying. Is it possible? I only built a radio so we could get some news from our country. Nothing more. Am I capable of sending a message somewhere through a radio? This prison is so far away from our country that escaping from here is impossible. So how will I do that?" Still, the officer wasn't listening to him. Instead, I insisted again, "Quickly, tell me, to whom were we trying to send this information to you? Ethan tried to explain again and again, but the soldiers weren't ready to understand. Finally, Ethan said nothing and remained silent, which made the officer very angry. Then, some police officers took Ethan out. He was taken to a place where small cells were being built, and in these cells, they mainly kept prisoners. Despite all this, Ethan's torture didn't end. The next morning, a Japanese soldier named Nagasti arrived at the camp. Nagasti told Ethan and his comrades that Ethan would have to accompany him to headquarters because their chief officer would be questioning him. But Ethan didn't even have the strength to sit there. Nagasti then told Ethan that he had committed a grave crime and would now have to endure the constant pain of death. But if Ethan told the truth, his sentence might be reduced. In fact, the Japanese soldiers believed that Ethan had built this radio so that they could send all information about this place to their country's soldiers. Perhaps he is telling his wife. Emma is deeply saddened to hear of the brutal atrocity committed on Ethan. She never imagined, give it to him and his, they would lock him up and punish him. Then the officers would lock Ethan in a cage which didn't even have enough space to move properly. Ethan was then kept there for several days. He was given only a very small amount of food once a day. Sometimes he wasn't even allowed to drink water. There were also many other forms of torture. Occasionally, the officers would take him out and take him to the torture cell, subjecting him to excruciating torture, asking him the same question over and over. Who did he want to send this information to? But Ethan had no answer, so they gradually increased the intensity of the torture. They would pin Ethan down in one place and tie his hands and feet. A pipe is inserted into the mouth, and a pressure of very fresh water is sent through it. Ethan is then unable to breathe and dies. His body burned completely in the heat, and at night he was kept locked in a dangerously dark room. Gradually, under the influence of hunger, pain, and torture, Ethan lost hope of survival, and every moment seemed to be approaching death. But Tone Day, while he was trapped in that bamboo cage, he looked up at the sky and saw hundreds of parasols descending from the sky. This awakened a ray of hope within Ethan, as these parasols were primarily from British soldiers. They had somehow learned about this place, so they came prepared to rescue the prisoners. The British soldiers then immediately capture the entire Japanese camp. They surround everyone and immediately take them into custody and take them to the bank block. The British soldiers then arrest the Japanese soldiers as well, because the atrocities they committed against the prisoners were a serious crime. A British soldier then tells all the Japanese soldiers that they will face punishment for the brutal atrocities they have committed against our British soldiers. Your decision will be made in the bank block. After this, all the Japanese soldiers are sent to the bank block. Now we see Mike again in the present time where all these events take place in Ethan's house, who writhes in pain. He realizes how dangerous pain really is. Despite this, the officers continue to ask him the same questions. Ethan replies that he only wanted to know the news from their country. He had no other plans. But Nagasti and the other officers do not believe him. On the other hand, Pilla was waiting for Ethan to return, as 2 weeks had passed since Ethan was taken away. But till now he had not heard from Ethan. Therefore, Pili and his companions were very worried about Ethan. Meanwhile, Ethan was kept in the same cage all day long. Do you remember? They told us if we were truly men to go and commit suicide. They said no man could live with the memories of the humiliation and stigma we had endured there. But, back then, we told the Japanese soldiers only one thing. A true man endures whatever life throws at him, but he never gives up and commits suicide. In a good way, she could have known Ethan was in such deep trauma. Mike then tells Emma, "In fact, those who witness the torture we endured at that time can never erase those memories from their hearts. After our liberation, we all tried very hard to forget those memories. But believe me, even after trying so hard, we couldn't forget them. Even today, we wake up every night in fear. We even sought treatment from many doctors, but to no avail. Perhaps the same thing is happening to Ethan, and maybe Ethan didn't want to hurt you in any way, so he didn't tell you anything." Hearing all this, Emma's eyes well up with tears. Emma quickly returns home and meets Ethan very happily. She tries to talk to him. She tries her best to cheer him up. There she plays Ethan's favorite music and dances with him, but then the music changes to an old song. Ethan becomes completely distraught. He immediately turns off the music and leaves. Emma couldn't understand how she could make Ethan normal again. Despite her many efforts, she failed every time. One evening, when Ethan was busy with his work, Franklin came there. Franklin then showed Ethan a photo, which was of the same soldier named Nagasti, the same soldier who had tortured him. Mike then tells Ethan that Frank is still alive and is now in the same place in Thailand where they were once held captive. Frank is now working there as a tourist guide. Therefore, Mike wanted Ethan to take revenge on Frank. Perhaps doing so would bring Ethan some peace. The pain he has been carrying within himself for so many years might be alleviated. Ethan also longed to do to Frank what he had done to him. But Ethan tells Mike that he already knows Frank is still alive. Yet, he lacks the courage to take revenge because he knows that Frank now has a family, including a wife and children. Therefore, he wants to forget everything by thinking about them. But then Franklin tries to reason with him. Have you forgotten everything? Have you forgotten what they did to us, Ethan? Did they ever think about our family? What? Because Ethan was a very brave soldier and could have exacted revenge if he wanted. Mike knew full well that Ethan would definitely break his promise. That's why he said goodbye to Ethan once and for all and freed him from that pain by taking his own life. When news of Mike's death reached Ethan, he was deeply saddened and completely shattered. But he was now determined to fulfill Mike's wish. He would punish Frank Ash deserved. So he made all preparations to go to Thailand because Frank was there now. Without wasting any time, Ethan immediately left for Thailand. He was traveling on the same train that traveled the same route they had built. And this brought back to Ethan those dangerous moments from his past. He fights with himself and survives and finally takes his revenge. So now the wisest thing for Ethan would be to take revenge. This time, he should not step back under any circumstances. Saying all these things, Mike becomes quite emotional. It seemed as if he was seeing all the events of the past before his eyes. The truth is that, like Ethan, Mike was also deeply traumatized. His mental condition was also noted all good. He is also alive, fighting with himself. Mike then requests Ethan to take revenge for the injustice done to them. After this, he takes Ethan's service. But today, Ethan felt something different about the way Finney took leave. Then, Franklin tells Ethan's family, including his wife, Emma, that Emma should always be with Ethan. He should never leave Ethan because Ethan has suffered a lot in his life. After this, Franklin bids farewell to Emma as well. After this, Franklin travels to a place far away from his hometown and ends his life there, as living with those terrible memories was too painful for him. He had originally wanted to end his life long ago, but before dying, he wanted the person who wronged him to see his punishment. That is why, after so many years, when he finds out about Frank, he goes and tells Ethan everything so that Ethan can take revenge. Memories of the brutal suffering the soldiers had to endure back then came flooding back to him. After a long journey, Ethan reached Thailand. He went straight to the same concentration camp where they had been held. But the place was no longer the same. It had been transformed into a large museum. It displayed the torture inflicted on prisoners during the war. There were even statues of workers building the railway line. In other words, all the painful tortures inflicted by the Japanese soldiers were beautifully presented here. Ethan felt a little happy seeing this, because through it, the world could see the true meaning of their lives. People are those painful. It was evening, and the museum was about to close. But before that, Ethan went inside the museum. He went straight to the room where he was always tortured and asked various questions. But now the atmosphere inside had changed. Ethan then went straight to Frank. Frank didn't recognize him. But after looking into Ethan's eyes for a while, Frank recognized him clearly. Seeing Ethan, he remembered how much he had tortured Ethan many years ago. But now Frank felt very ashamed and guilty because of this. Ethan then asks Frank to sit on the chair, just as he had asked in the past. And Frank doesn't object. He was listening to what Ethan was saying. Ethan then asks Frank, "How are you still alive? Your comrades are all dead." Frank then tells Ethan that all his comrades except him were sent to a prison in Bangkok, and the reason he wasn't sent to jail was that he was a translator. He knew both British and Japanese. That's why a British soldier took him into his team at the time, and he later helped them a lot. That's why he's still alive. Frank then tells Ethan that he knows very well that they did a lot of bad things, although he didn't understand it at the time. One day, when he comes with his team to inspect the railway line construction, he sees the bodies of many dead people. This makes him realize that he truly committed a grave injustice, but by then it was too late. He never found peace in his mind. So, after a while, he joins the army as a tourist guide so that he can present the true events of the war to everyone, admit his mistakes, and make people understand the horrors of war so that such incidents never happen again. But hearing all this, Ethan becomes enraged. He tells Frank that whatever they did it intentionally. Therefore, after everything, they are still criminals. Saying this, Ethan angrily breaks a stick kept there. The same stick used to torture prisoners. Ethan then tells Frank to place his hand on a handle where prisoners' hands were once placed, Toby beaten with sticks. Frank reluctantly complies and places his hand there. Ethan had always wanted to break Frank's hand into pieces, and Frank had no objection to this. However, it is seen here that Ethan does not harm his hand. You will be able to know about torture. When Ethan goes a little inside, he sees that many tourists have come there, and all the tourists who have visited here are told about the entire history of this place. Telling, instead, he hits a nearby table because he knows that even if Frank is a criminal, he can't do that. He has insight. Then, Ethan takes Frank out of there to the prison where he was held captive day after day. Ethan locks Frank in the same cell and asks him how he feels now. Frank doesn't answer. After this, Ethan goes straight to the dark room he sees again and again because it was the room where he was tortured the most and where he was strangled with a pipe around his neck. Here, Ethan repeatedly tries to torture Frank, but fails every time. Finally, he takes Frank to the cell next to Frank. He goes and sits down. Then Frank says to Ethan, "I know what you're feeling right now. Trust me, I'm truly ashamed of my sins." To be honest, it wasn't entirely our fault back then. We understood what our government told us. The government told us we were fighting for our country, to protect its honor and existence. This is true welfare. That's why we continued fighting blindly. But later, we realized that war never brings peace. It leaves a torment in the heart that has to be endured for the rest of our lives. In fact, this is exactly what happens during any war. The country's government brainwashes people in various ways. She explains to them that if they win the war, all their problems will be solved. They will have a better life. But this war never brings welfare to the common people. After listening to Frank, Ethan understands that Frank has truly understood his mistake. He is no longer the same person he was before. He has changed a lot and is truly suffering a lot. He is probably feeling the same pain he felt for so many years. So Ethan frees Frank and leaves. Then he goes straight to that place, the very place where he and his friends used to work on the railway line. So, after seeing that entire area once, Ethan returns home. A few days later, Frank sends Ethan a letter saying, "I've truly realized my mistake. The day you came to me, I wanted to hold you tight and apologize, but I didn't get that chance. So, I'm sending you this letter today. Will you forgive me? If you truly forgive me, perhaps the burden of sin will be lifted from my heart, and I'll be able to find some peace for the rest of my life." Reading Frank's letter, Ethan becomes very emotional. He understands Frank's mental state. Ethan then goes to meet Frank with his wife, Patrick. He goes and forgives him wholeheartedly. He tells him that it's true that Frank did wrong, but he's realized his mistake and tried to lighten the burden of his sin. This is a very big thing. He is also a very courageous person, because not everyone has the courage to tell the truth to the whole world, even after such a terrible incident. Frank becomes very emotional after hearing all this. Ethan then pulls him closer, and from that day on, they become friends. After that day, both of them feel much lighter in heart. Their friendship lasts their entire lives. Then Frank dies in August 2011, and Ethan dies in 2012. This is where this beautiful story ends.